This video is supported by Atlas VPN. Developed by top cybersecurity specialists and IT engineers, Atlas VPN helps its over 6 million customers protect their privacy and security online. To protect unlimited devices, block malicious ads, stream your favorite shows, including, of course, Unheard TV, and protect your Google search history, claim the new Atlas VPN Big Deal. At just £1.50 a month, it's the most affordable VPN on the market right now. By following the link in the description box, just down there, you can get an additional 3 months for free. One Atlas VPN subscription covers all of your devices, and with a 30 days money-back guarantee, it's totally risk-free. Visit get.atlasvpn.com/unheard to claim this limited time offer.
Hello and welcome back to Unheard. From this week, we are back to a normal schedule. We have a packed programme of interesting people to help us investigate what is really going on in a realistic and hopefully thoughtful way. Today, we're going to talk about Russell Brand. The media here has been absolutely covered since Saturday evening with allegations that have emerged against the one-time comedian, now anti-establishment influencer. The accusations concern sexual assault and rape from the period of 2006 to 2013. What we want to really focus on is the reaction, because the media has been incredibly divided. There has been, I would call it, an establishment view on the story, which is very uncomplicated, which is that these women are heroes for coming forward, the allegations are absolutely awful, the journalism is exemplary, and anyone who has any other thoughts beyond that is somehow defending a monster. That, I would say, is the dominant view. And meanwhile, on the other side, there is the anti-establishment reaction. People who perhaps followed Russell Brand, or at least felt that they were happy that he was asking difficult questions. Their view is that one of their most powerful spokespeople is being taken down, being the victim of some kind of coordinated attack, a political witch hunt. So which is it? Well, it's been pretty hard to find anyone who has wise words to say on this topic. So I'm delighted that we have found one person, and that is none other than Mary Harrington, Unheard's star columnist, who wrote a very insightful and balanced and fair piece about Russell Brand for us the other day. She joins us now. Welcome, Mary.
Thanks for having me, Freddie.
I guess I wanted to start with an idea that you have written about in that piece, which is that we must be able to hold more than one idea in our heads at the same time. That there may be things that both sides of this kind of media argument have got right.
I think it's eminently possible that they're all right. Yes, it's eminently possible. I mean, I couldn't speculate on whether or not Russell Brand did those things or not, although he has avowedly, by his own admission, slept with thousands of women over the course of what he describes as a sex addiction. He has argued in a defense against these allegations that every single one of those incidents was consensual. I mean, I struggle to see at that rate of throughput how he could remember all of the details of every single encounter. But perhaps that's what he genuinely believes. It's eminently possible that that's what he genuinely believes, that they were all consensual, that there was no issue, and therefore he believes that he was innocent. It's also possible that some of the women in question may remember those incidents differently. This is one of the perennial difficulties in cases of sexual assault, is that the parties on either side may remember what happened very differently. And often it can come down to one person's word against another. There's a perennial difficulty with even bringing such cases to court. I mean, the low rate of conviction in cases of rape and sexual assault are well known, is a topic of repeated fury and lamentation by feminists, and often it comes down to the fact that it's one person's word against the other. So it's eminently possible that everyone is telling the truth as they remember it, and it's eminently possible that those women really feel that they were sexually abused and sexually assaulted, and it's very possible that they're telling the truth about what happened to them, and also that this is coming up now as for political reasons. And my read on this is very straightforwardly that we can zoom out from whether or not Russell Brand in particular did those things to the question of how sex and power and public hypocrisy map onto one another. I think there is a well-known correlation between powerful men, dark triad traits, including sociopathy and narcissism, for example. an indifference to other people's feelings, and a regard for and a committed pursuit of one's own desires. This is well known and shown in the psychological literature. So powerful men often exhibit dark triad traits. We can only speculate as to the correlation between those things. Powerful men often get to be powerful by coercing, charming, beguiling, manipulating other people to do what they want. And without taking no for an answer. This is also known, and it stands to reason that a subset of those men who are perhaps particularly priapic might extend bending those around them to their will to the domain of sexuality in a way which, if you're on the receiving end of it, comes across as really quite rapey. I couldn't speculate, as I say. I think it's a matter for. It's beyond my jurisdiction to say whether Russell Brand was one of these individuals or not. But we have seen many others. I would imagine this is a pattern that's visible throughout history. I mean, we only have to think about Harvey Weinstein, or indeed the entire ecosystem surrounding Epstein, to note that this is hardly, or indeed the grooming gangs in Rotherham. This is hardly the first instance of a power asymmetry between men and women, which is exploited in order to gain sexual access to the women concerned, and a reluctance for a whole range of different reasons to speak out about that, and which only then becomes which only then gets honed in on in the public conversation. The exception to speaking out then emerges when there's some political reason. So it's not because the women themselves have suffered; it's because that person has political enemies.
I think we should just restate that, because it's important to do that. That the central argument of the Me Too movement was that the kind of power asymmetries you're talking about, particularly in the context of rich and famous men, have for many decades gone pretty much unchallenged, and they've been able to get away with things that by today's standards would be completely unacceptable. And in this case, there is we should say, at least one accusation of actual rape, which appears to have evidence behind it. And if that is carried out, of course, full justice should be served. So in that sense, you're endorsing the impetus behind it. You're saying that these kind of things should be brought to light.
I think it's true that power asymmetries are often present in instances of sexual abuse, yes. And I also think it's true that it's appropriate to speak out when that happens. However, I think the thrust of my argument is not that these things are good, but that this principle is applied very unevenly. This is where those defending Russell Brand also have a point. But in the article, I pointed out, I argued that their defense of Brand both enacts and also calls out the politicization of sexual wrongdoing, in the sense that they are arguing that Brand's other attributes, his purported ability to speak truth to power, quote unquote, for example, should be treated as a mitigating factor in whether or not he actually did these things. I see that very few of these people are saying he didn't do it, because nobody really knows at the end of the day. And I suspect that even those people defending Brand would be willing to contemplate the fact that he probably did do those things, whether or not they think these things are worth criminal repercussions or even social repercussions is another matter. But the defence that's being offered is not he didn't do it. It's he's being punished because of politics, and therefore implicitly he should not be punished because of politics. So in a sense, they're perpetuating this assumption, which I think persists across the board, that other political factors and other questions of power and politics and who's up and who's down should be treated as mitigating factors in a case of possible sexual wrongdoing. Bluntly, I think Me Too is neither here nor there in that dynamic, because it's as old as time, and it has persisted. It's visibly persisted even since Me Too. Me Too has brought some social changes in that there's much more of a spotlight, I think, on the potential sexual wrongdoings of powerful men. But it doesn't follow from that there are no longer any protected castes of men who are considered exempt or partially exempt or entitled to an extra special layer of politicized unseeing. Think, for example, about those men who say they're women, and how much of an effort goes into not seeing the elevated prevalence of sexual wrongdoing, and the extremely high rate of sex offenders among the incarcerated population, for example. Consistently across several different countries, over half of trans women are sex offenders of the ones who are in prison. And it takes a considerable amount of effort not to notice a pattern like that. And the only inference is that it's not being noticed because for political reasons, which is essentially the same pattern as we saw in the case of a great many other men. It's simply that the focus has moved from men in positions of status and power, who are now at least sometimes considered fair game since Me Too.
So applying that to Russell Brand, it's possible to stop short of a claim of a conspiracy, that somehow it's a coordinated media stitch-up that has been orchestrated by a particular cabal, but still observe that those political factors helped him remain unattacked, unprosecuted for many years when he was, as it were, the darling of the establishment. We had Ed Miliband going to his flat mid-general election to be interviewed by him. He was voted the 4th most influential thinker in the world by Prospect magazine. He guest edited The New Statesman. He had a column in The Guardian, etc., etc. During all of those years, these allegations didn't come out. Now that his politics has become anti-establishment, to say the least, and he's considered a real political threat, I suppose it's fair to observe that he is more of a desirable target. That there is a more of a prize to exposing him now than maybe there was in previous decades.
I mean, a slightly less overblown version of that, a slightly less conspiratorial again version of that, might be that Russell Brand isn't really a political threat. It's simply that he no longer works in the institution, the legacy media, and so they just don't care what happens to him anymore. He's no longer one of their own, and there's no particular professional vested interest in protecting him. So a lot of the open secrets, which might have had blowing the cover on an open secret, which and suffering professional blowback as a result, is just simply not something which applies to Russell Brand anymore. I mean, at the end of there are, I'm sure we can all think of people about whom it's well known that among insiders that they're a sex pest, and these are just not things which are discussed in public. Because there might be professional blowback for doing so. This is common. This is something which happens in politics. It happens in high-profile situations. This is not unusual, and I think much more plausible even than the conspiratorial version, which says this is a concerted effort to take down Russell Brand because he's a threat to the institutions or whatever. Is simply that he's gone freelance and just nobody cares anymore. So he's fair game.
It's possible to say he's a more desirable target as the subject of this kind of investigation. It's worth putting those kind of resources into investigating him now in a way that it wasn't before. I mean, the social media is full of people saying that they are glad that they've been anxious about him for these other reasons. I'm looking at a tweet here by George Monbiot, who says, "I've no insight into the grave allegations against Russell Brand aired this weekend, but I've been concerned for a while about the way he now amplifies groundless conspiracy theories and the far-right influencers who promote them." So there's a sense that he's getting his comeuppance.
Certainly the case that among some of the people who've picked up and amplified the allegations would be keener to believe it of an enemy than a friend, because I mean, again, that's a standard feature of of people. We all want to think well of our friends and badly of our enemies, and so I'm sure that there are people who would have defended him at one point when they felt he was on their side, who would leap to condemn him now that they see him as being on an enemy side. That feels very plausible. Whether that friend enemy dynamic was what prompted the initial investigation, I don't think we can know, and I think it's perfectly plausible that the initial investigation largely happened just because he's low-hanging fruit, because he's no longer protected by professional connections within the media ecosystems which ran the documentary.
I'm trying to carve out a kind of plausible ground between these apparently completely opposed groups that you see on social media that will allow for nothing of the other argument, that actually it's possible to both take the accusations really seriously, think that it's important that they come to light and that justice is served, but also recognise that shifting political moods and, as you call them, different friend-enemy camps feed into the media. I mean, in a sense, that's an obvious statement. It's not a conspiratorial statement. And of course, it affects what kind of stories media choose to go after.
Yeah, I'd say that's a fair summary.
So what about the actual process then? Even with the politics aside, there's been a lot of these style of investigations. And I wonder what you think about some of their features. Like, for example, does the passage of time with these kind of allegations, should it be taken into account? Some people will definitely look at the fact that so many of these accusations were 10 or, in the case of the new one that has surfaced this morning, 20 years ago. There's an allegation of something taking place in Soho in 2003. Does it make you uneasy when these allegations are so old?
I don't know is the answer. Should there be a statute of limitations on allegations which are difficult to prove, but that could potentially ruin somebody's reputation anyway? I don't know. That's politics, isn't it?
Statute of limitations is a question, and there's something about, well, what do you think about this? The dramatized nature of the television documentary, with actors playing the accusers with sort of close-up filming of their hand movements as if that was an indication of their distress. The public invitations for further victims to come forward, both by the Metropolitan Police and by the media, which has now resulted in more accusations. This is now quite a common way for these investigations to take place. My question is this a mechanism that can lead to justice, or should we be anxious about it, whether it's true or not?
I mean, it's pretty clear that a documentary so dramatized is going to appeal as much to people's prurient interest as it is to any pursuit of meaningful justice. I mean, it's difficult to see how justice can be served at this point anyway, unless somebody has clear evidence. In which case, absolutely, I hope that can be prosecuted, and it should be prosecuted. And I don't think there should be a statute of limitations on clearly evidenced cases of rape and sexual assault. Absolutely not. For a great majority, this is something more in the order of tabloid titillation and public tarring and feathering. And what justice or even sort of proper retribution looks like in that case, I don't know. I mean, I suppose one might argue that it serves a sort of pour encourager les autres kind of a function in discouraging others from going for some putative future title of Shagger of the Year. I don't know. Perhaps these kind of public spectacles will serve to condition public morality such that future priapic excesses don't leave such a sort of trail of destruction behind them. I don't know. I mean, it depends on what you think the expose is for, and what justice looks like in that context.
I think what you said is exactly what is happening. Public shaming like this will leave a lot of people anxious about their own past, probably, about their own behaviours. That it will certainly have an effect on public behaviour. And I suppose the question is whether that's a good way to condition public behaviour. It's a fearful way. It doesn't involve a kind of clear process. It's an illiberal system, I suppose.
You're talking to somebody who styles herself as a reactionary feminist. I don't have an issue with the literal means of conditioning public morals.
Yeah, that may be a difference between us. Something about it, to me, isn't due process enough. It doesn't feel proper to go after someone purely on the front page of the newspapers with historic allegations like this. It feels like justice might be better served in a courtroom or in some other closed environment with a fairer, more measured process.
I have to say, if I'm honest, I look at the whole dynamic and I don't find myself defaulting to seeing myself in Russell Brand's position and thinking, poor Russell Brand, this seems very unfair. I find myself, perhaps inevitably, putting myself in the position of one of those young women one who perhaps no longer so young women. I found myself, or the great many other women throughout history who found themselves at the sharp end. I mean, again, I don't know what the truth is or is not of the Russell Brand allegations, but there are plenty of others which are well substantiated. Young women who found themselves at the receiving end of sometimes unwanted sexual attentions from somebody with a great deal more influence than them, and who may or may not have found somebody willing to listen to their story over time. And I wish it were not the case that only some of those allegations come to light, because a great many such sexually excessive individuals continue to be protected by the matrix of power and influence that surrounds them, and some of these stories never come to light as a result. I wish that were not so. Does it follow from this that I don't think that where stories do come to light and are treated in a sort of excessive, spectacular fashion, that shouldn't happen? I don't know the answer to that. I'm very ambivalent on that. I mean, I think from another downbeat perspective, you might say that in making a spectacular example of one such accused individual, in a sense, you're letting all of the others off the hook. And from that point of view, I would condemn the spectacular sort of sacrificial victim of something which is actually an endemic dynamic, which maps onto sex and power and public hypocrisy.
You style yourself as a reactionary feminist. There is something quite unusual about the mood when discussing these kind of sexual crimes at the moment. At least it's unusual historically. It hasn't happened before. You might say that it has happened at previous, more religious moments in history, but what's your overall feeling about today's attitude to these kinds of sexual crimes?
Very confused. But my attitude is that our collective view is wildly dissonant. I mean, I think it appears to be more or less completely normalized now for adolescent girls to follow the Instagram to OnlyFans pipeline, for example. They start out posting semi-naked pictures themselves on Instagram. I mean, there's a well-documented ecosystem of child erotica consumers and keywords and algorithms that recommend content of that kind to enjoyers of such material on Instagram. And a great many of these girls who just do it for the fun and the likes and the interaction on Instagram then conclude that, fine, well, I might as well get paid for it on OnlyFans, and boom, all of a sudden, aged 18, they're cam girls. And the world, we seem to tolerate this, and we don't seem to view this as a sort of mass digital child grooming. And yet a story like the pseudonymous Alice recounted in the Times report on Russell Brand, who was 16 when she was approached by Brand in Russell Square, and who then had a 3-month reportedly abusive relationship with him, where various unpleasant things happened to her, is treated as horrific. And I'm thinking, how are we making sense of this cognitive dissonance? I think we're very confused about sexuality. I mean, we're simultaneously. I mean, I was reviewing my go-to cursed sex education book for teenagers from the American Culture Wars this morning, which I treat as a sort of reference for exactly these kind of cognitive dissonances. And I was reviewing what it had to say about virginity, and it essentially said that virginity is not a thing, because you can have, so there are so many different kinds of first time, that just sticking to the cis heteropatriarchal one of penis and vagina sex is neither here nor there, and therefore there's no such thing as virginity, and therefore you can't lose your virginity, and therefore there's nothing special about sex. But it follows from this that you might as well be having it whenever and wherever. And I think this is which leaves girls such as the pseudonymous Alice in an invidious position, because then they can't say that anything was done to hurt them after a potentially abusive relationship, provided within this particular rubric that it was consensual, which is, I mean, and that's and when it's boiled down to something so transactional as consent, it's very difficult then to find ways of articulating the intuition that I think a great many people still feel, that in fact consent just isn't enough, and in fact there is something special about your first sexual experience, that there is something distinctively vulnerable about young women, and that there is a distinctive pattern of sexual predation and sexual vulnerability between a certain subset of older men and very young girls that ought to be paid special attention to. And none of this fits within the received liberal paradigm of how we approach and normalize and legitimize and celebrate sexual liberation, which makes responses like this extremely confused, and I think probably also contributes to the pattern of general hand waving interspersed by periodic witch hunts.
So there's something, it's a sort of half ultra conservative, half ultra liberal, you could almost say hypocritical confusion that I suppose makes it quite hard to navigate for ordinary people as well as public figures.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty accurate.
The reaction to this story, to me, strikes me as yet another staging post in the divisions between the sort of establishment and anti-establishment viewpoints. I can't remember a story like this that was so universal in the establishment press and yet which still had so much kickback from really quite powerful, albeit minority, voices. We've had Jordan Peterson, Elon Musk, people on television channels, quite a few quite powerful people with large followings essentially leaping to Russell Brand's defense. And I don't think that would have happened 5 years ago. And I just wonder what you think. It's almost like an epistemological divide between a whole sort of understanding of what is true, set of knowledge, which is contained within the more establishment viewpoint, and now this growing alternative world, which refuses to accept what it is told by the mainstream media. And I just wonder what your reflections are on that.
It certainly continues that pattern. I don't know if it's escalated that pattern, which seems pretty well entrenched at this point and has been for, particularly since COVID, which I think was the great cleavage. Probably also because that was the point where we shifted decisively from being a print-first culture to a digital-first culture. And I would say that these kinds of epistemological bubbles, which my friend Catherine Dee calls politics as fandoms, I think is a great way of thinking about it, different epistemological fandoms. I think that's a characteristic feature of a digital-first culture, and it's not going to go away. What the prognosis is for any kind of coherent mass politics, where reality itself becomes a series of competing and mutually exclusive fandoms, is anybody's guess. I mean, if I have one reflection, it's that we could probably all do with going outside more.
That's a good note to end on. Let's do just that. Thank you, Mary.
Thanks, Freddie.
Well, clearly it's a very difficult topic, especially as at the moment these are allegations and we are supposed to have a principle of innocent until proven guilty. It's also difficult in the current febrile media atmosphere where people are drawing up public lists of shame of, quote, defenders of Russell Brand as an intimidation or scare tactic. But I hope we managed there to elucidate that it is possible to hold more than one idea in your head at the same time. That, on the one hand, these are grave accusations that obviously must be taken seriously, and that aspects of the style of the investigation, the timing, the process are far from ideal. Thanks to Mary for joining us, and thanks to you. This was Unheard.